Okay, so this message is a little short of a normal message, but it's going to be long enough to take us probably a little bit past noon. Um, but it's a good one, and I really wanted to bring this one to you. It's about using the golden rule, and you know the golden rule very well. We were all brought up with it as kids, I think, and as adults, I don't think that we really think about the golden rule so much anymore. But there's a lot more to it than we realize. And so I'm going to dig into that today and show you some more about that, both in terms of where the golden rule comes from and in terms of how we apply it to our lives. So the origin is we often think that Jesus was the first one to use the golden rule. That's the first place we hear of it in the New Testament. But that isn't true. He put a little twist on it, but the origin actually is in the Old Testament. And it's really a foundational, not just Christian, but Jewish principle. We'll see that as we go through that. So it really came from the very beginning, from God, because it is a fundamental idea. And we're going to see that it comes in different forms. And I hope you'll find that interesting, that you can say it in different ways and get more from it. And as I said, we're going to talk a little bit about application. We're going to talk about partiality and favoritism and justice and other things like that we wouldn't naturally think about being related to the golden rule, but they really are, and we'll see how. So I'll call it the Jewish golden rule. You will probably recognize it from someplace else. This is a verse that Jesus quoted from when he was asked about what's the greatest law and the greatest of the commandments, and he quoted from here as being the second greatest of them. But really, this is referred to as the Jewish golden rule. This is, if you look up golden rule on a Jewish site, this is what you will get. And so they think of it that way, and we're going to see why. So from Leviticus 19:18, it says, "You shall not take vengeance nor hold any grudge against the sons of your people, but you shall love your neighbor as yourself." That's the key piece. I am the Lord. So generally Christians, when we read this, don't recognize this as the golden rule. It doesn't sound the same. It's in a different form than we're used to seeing. And so we wouldn't naturally say that, hey, this is the same thing Jesus said, but it really is. We just have to think about it the right way. It's reflexive, which means your neighbor is yourself, is really what it's coming down to. Treat your neighbor as yourself. And so you think of your neighbor as being the same as you. And once you've done that, once you've put yourself in the other person's place, now you can say this in a different way. You can say, if you love your neighbor in the way you love yourself, you won't treat him differently from how you want to be treated. Okay, so it really is the same thing. When you hear it that way, you say, oh yeah, that's starting to sound like the golden rule we remember Jesus talking about. So it really is the same thing. And we're going to see even more as we go along here how it is the same thing. And as I said, Jesus calls this the second most important commandment of the two commandments. And so this is really the summation of some of the commandments on the tablets. So where was the first appearance in the golden rule form that we're familiar with? Well, it turns out that that is also Old Testament, where we see it that's much closer to that form. And this comes from the book of Tobit. I'll talk about that in just a moment. But Tobit says, do not do to any man the things which you yourself hate. Okay, that's worded a little awkwardly to doesn't roll off the tongue. But it's the same idea. You can see in there that same reflexivity of the Leviticus verse, and we see also that it's starting to look like the same way Jesus talked about the golden rule. Don't do things to other people which you don't want them doing to you. And so a quick note on Tobit. Tobit is a book from the 3rd century. That's when it was written. So that comes well after Malachi's time. 3rd century BC, I should say, but nonetheless, it comes after Malachi's time. And so by far, most scholars recognize it as a fictional work. It's not a work of God. It's not seen as being part of God-inspired works. It does appear in the Jewish Bible, and it appears in the Apocrypha that the Catholic Church contains as part of their Bible, but no Protestant organization accepts this as being part of God's Word or the Bible. And so, in fact, nothing from the whole intertestamental period is accepted that way. It's not believed that any of those authors were inspired by God to write. So yet, here it is, this book, somebody who wrote from that period of time has this understanding of the golden rule. Now, he's stating it in what we're going to call the negative form, the do not form. And you're going to see that there's a positive form, and that's actually the form that Jesus is going to use when he says it. So he says, "Do not do to any man the things which you yourself hate," and we'll see the positive form later on. So there's another person called Hillel the Elder, who was a Jewish person who talked on this topic. He died when Jesus was very young, so he's almost contemporaneous with Jesus. And he said, this is a quote from him: "When Rabbi Hillel the Elder was asked somewhat sarcastically by a non-Jew to teach him the entire Torah while the man stood on one foot, Hillel gently told him, 'That which is hateful to you, do not do to your fellow. That is the entire Torah, and the rest is commentary. Now go and study.'" So again, you see here, we're seeing the negative form of the golden rule being spoken. It's do not do to other people what you don't want them doing to you. Um, and so we see Hillel the Elder, who was a sage. He was a highly respected person in his time. He wrote a lot of stuff that even exists into our time. And and so we see him expressing the same idea, but in the negative form. And so by go and study, he says, yes, this little sentence, "That which is hateful to you, do not do to your fellow," that is the entire Torah, the entire 5 books of Moses. And everything else in the Bible is commentary on this idea. So he says this is foundational. This is everything. This is understanding. This is a big thing. And if you go and study, you'll get even more out of it, and you'll find all the depths and the applications of this simple little bit that he has said here. And so that's very much in line with everything we understand about the Golden Rule. If you can understand all of the Golden Rule and apply it to your life, you can live the life that God wants you to live. So now we get to Jesus, and he's the first person to speak using the positive form in any recording that we have, any written word that we have from that time. And so he says, this one's from Matthew: "Everything whatsoever you desire that people should do for you, do likewise for them. For this is the law and the prophets." Okay, now he says something very interesting here: the law and the prophets. He's really saying the same thing that Hillel said. The Jewish Bible is broken into sections, and generally the sections are identified as the law, which is the Torah, the 5 books of Moses, the prophets, which is Ezekiel, Isaiah, all of those prophets, all their writings are grouped together in one group. And then the writings are most of the works of Solomon, Ecclesiastes, the wisdom books like that. And so in Jewish terms, that's how they break down the Bible into sections. Those are their 3 sections. And so what we see here, Jesus saying, he says, this is the law and the prophets. He's saying, much like Hillel said, if you understand this and you do this, you are observing everything of the law and the prophets. You're doing everything right. And so I thought that was quite interesting. It really means that the law and the prophets can be summarized this way. Now, Luke also quotes Jesus that way. He doesn't refer to the law and the prophets, but I thought I'd keep this in here for completeness. It says, "And just as you desire people to do for you, do also for them." So we see both Matthew and Luke saying that Jesus said it in the positive form. He says, do, not do not. And so we'll talk about that a little bit more in just a second too. But these two positive and negative forms are different ways of expressing the same idea. So, but the positive form is a better form, and that's what Jesus teaches. And we'll see in just a moment. This is from Luke again. We just read this, but I brought it up here for you to see. This has got that do form and not the do not form in it. So the positive form is do now what you want in the future. Okay, so just as you desire people would do for you, do also for them. So do now for people, and because that's what you would want to be treated in the future if you were in the same situation where you needed that help. So even if your neighbor doesn't treat you right, you've made the world a better place by treating him right because you've done first. You're not waiting for him to do first and to do not do anything bad. You are doing first yourself. And so that's very in line with a lot of other teachings that Jesus gave us. That preemptive, let's say it. You do it first. You do what's right first and make the world a better place. Instead of waiting and not doing the bad thing, instead do the good thing now. So that negative form that we talked about is do not do now what you don't want in the future. Okay, so you can see that the difference is just that difference in do and do not, but it affects how the world works really, is because you make the world a better place. instead of not making the world a worse place. So there's also a retaliatory form, which is invalid. And I'll make it clear that this is not a valid way of looking at what Jesus said or what Leviticus said or anybody else said. You can say it as, do unto others as they have done unto you. Okay, that's not biblical. So what that really says, if you ascribe to that, which you shouldn't, is do now what was done to you in the past. So that's getting even, and that's, the Bible talks against that. Or you could also think of it as doing in the future what was done to you now, and that's what we call a grudge. I'm going to get even in the future. I'm going to even this up and settle the score and make it even. All of those are bad ideas, but it sounds a little bit like what Jesus said, but it isn't. It's very different in that wording. And First Peter talks about that in chapter 3, verse 9, and it says, "You should not repay a person evil for evil, neither insults for insults, but to the contrary of these things, give blessings. For you are called to this, that you would inherit blessings." So if you look at that, let me just get my pointer out. Give blessings so that you would inherit blessings is very much like the golden rule. And so we see that basic idea of doing good, give blessings so that you would inherit blessings. So you do first, you do the good thing first, and in time, what is coming to you from that will come. Okay, so that's kind of the history of the golden rule. We're going to start looking at applications now. And the basic application that we understand, I think, is that it's a verse talking about helping people, always being there to help someone who's in need, and to do what's right always. And so things happen. Life can be unfair. We know that things happen to us, and we wind up in situations we didn't want to. And what we don't want when that happens is we don't want somebody taking advantage of us or kicking us when we're down, mistreating us because we're down and we were once something and now we're nothing. Instead of that, what we really want is mercy. We may even need help getting up again. And so that's everybody, not just us. Everybody wants that same thing. Nobody wants to be in that situation where you're down because of circumstances that happened to you, and now people are taking advantage of you and making your life worse than it was. And so as soon as you understand that that's a situation that everybody gets into, and you know that, then you can see that we should always be showing mercy and helping others, because our turn may come for life to knock us down. Okay, so we always show that mercy first and to others, and when it comes our turn for bad things to happen, we will hope and expect, but maybe not even get the mercy and help that we need. The world is sometimes just completely unfair, and that doesn't just apply to our friends and co-workers and people that we like. It applies even to our enemies. And Romans 12, Paul talks about that in verse 20. And he says, and if your enemy hungers, feed him. So there's a person who's down. He's gone hungry for some reason, feed him. Or if he thirsts, again, something's happened to him and he's in trouble, give him a drink. And if you do these things to him, you will heap coals of fire on his skull. Now, Paul is actually making a little different point from us here. He's talking about a person that sees you as his enemy. Now, you don't see him as an enemy, but he sees you as an enemy, and you know that because of the way he's treated you in the past. But when he's down, you feed him, and when he's in trouble, you give him drink. And the consequence of that, if he is unrepentant in his life, is that he will suffer in the fiery torment that Cynthia was talking about earlier. So again, the golden rule is applying here in even with our enemies. So when the verse said that to everyone, then it means to everyone, not just your friends. So, but that's the basics of the golden rule, but it's not everything. There's much, much more to that, and we'll start digging into those bits now. So the golden rule is actually involved with partiality as well, and you might not have thought that. So partiality is when you treat one person different from yourself. So the standard you have for you is different from how you expect people to exist. So the verse from James 2 says, and if you fulfill the written law of God in this, as it is written, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Okay, that's the verse or part of the verse that we talked at from Leviticus. He says, if you do that, you are doing well. But if you show partiality, you are sinning, and you are reproved by the written law as violators against the written law. So, um, he's referred to that Old Testament golden rule that we talked about, the Jewish golden rule, we called it. And he says that favoritism is a violation of the Old Testament golden rule. Now, we might not have understood that way, but treating people differently from yourself is a violation of the golden rule. And so the golden rule isn't just about doing good things to people, it's about how you treat them in life. And partiality, fairness, is a big part of that. And you can understand that pretty easily, I think, when you think about it. You don't, people don't want to be treated as second class people. You don't want to be treated as second class people. So you don't treat other people that way. You don't treat them unfavorably because they're different from you. And so that's just the basic. Everybody who is like you should be treated the same way that you want to be treated. So, and everyone recognizes this favoritism as mistreatment. Nobody wants to be on the bad end of that. Everybody, if anything, would prefer to be on the good end of that. But we're going to see that even that's a bad thing. Everyone recognizes favoritism when they see it. They can see someone being treated differently than them. And even cats and other animals, there have been studies about this, and apes and things like that understand when they're being treated unfavorably. And the one that I saw is they were giving rewards to apes for doing some activity. And so once they did the activity, they got a reward. But one ape was getting a really good reward, and the other one was just getting a so-called iffy kind of reward. And right away, the one who's getting the lesser reward looks over to see what the other guy got and sees that he got something really better. And he recognizes it as favoritism, and he feels cheated in that. He feels mistreated. So if even the animals understand that, then surely humans recognize favoritism, and nobody wants to be on the bad end of that. They see that as being wrong. And we see here that the golden rule, says James, is exactly about that. He says, if you are treating people differently, then you are sinning. So more on partiality here. So having looked at this now, we see that the golden rule isn't only about a one-to-one relationship between you and another person. It isn't just about treating a person the way you don't want to be treated. It's about how you treat a group of people and members in a group of people. So if you treat one person in a group differently than another person in that group, then that's the same thing. That's partiality. You've treated that person differently than you would have treated another person in the same circumstances. And so all of these things are not just about you and another person, but you and everybody in your life and how you treat them. So it would be unfair for you to treat, well, we're going to go to children in a moment, but I'll do that right now. It would be unfair for you to treat one child differently than another child. And I remember, well, actually, I'll tell that story later on. We'll go to that. So the group, and a group kind of matters here. The group that you're dealing in, a member of a group should be treated the same as the member of any other group. And in many cases, the group is just all people. And so no one wants to be treated with some sort of unfair partiality. But those things do have relationships to groups they're in. So children are one of those things. And so children are they want to be treated equally too. They don't want one child to be given something that they don't get, or something equivalent that they don't get. And so that unfairness, the children recognize. And your extended family is the same way. They don't want you treating some members of your extended family different than other members. And it's also true of coworkers. And so all of these different groups, the people in those groups expect to be treated the same as the other people in those groups. And so I bring up a question here that I hope you'll find interesting. Should a Christian manager fire someone? No one wants to be fired, so if you don't want to be fired, and so is the golden rule saying that you should never fire someone? No, that's not what the golden rule is talking about at all. The golden rule is about using the same standard for everyone. So as a manager, you have a group of employees that you're responsible for, and you apply the golden rule to them by using the same standard for deciding if they need to be fired or not as you would apply to everyone else in that group. And so it would be unfair for you to fire someone for something small and another person not firing them because even though they did something bigger. And so failing to fire someone could also be partiality. So being partial and breaking the golden rule is about treating people differently when you should be treating them the same. You should be using the same standard for everyone. And it's not about not doing bad things. People who commit crimes need to go to jail. That's the law. And the golden rule is not against that. The golden rule is simply about fairness. Are you doing this, treating this person who broke the law this way the same as another person who broke the law that way? So impartiality is really another name for justice. It's about fairness, fair treatment, equal treatment for everyone um, that's in that same group for sure. And so loving your neighbor doesn't mean being in love with your neighbor. And that's a problem that some people have had with this. It doesn't mean that you're so in love with your neighbor that you would never do anything wrong or do anything to hurt them. Sometimes it's necessary to do things that hurt people because of whatever the circumstances are, and I won't go into that. So we've already said that partiality and justice are related, so we'll talk a little bit more about that, and we'll go to another verse about that. From Leviticus 19:15, Old Testament again, talking about this idea of fairness and partiality and the Jewish golden rule, it says, do not pervert justice. Do not show partiality to the poor or favoritism to the great, but judge your neighbor fairly. Okay? Again, fairness and justice are key to this. And it says, don't treat the poor badder, and don't give favor to the great, the wealthy, or whoever is in charge of things. And so it works in both ways. It isn't just mistreating the poor, it's about mistreating the poor by helping the rich. So all fairness, the money doesn't matter, wealth doesn't matter, fairness transcends all of that, and people should be treated the same way whether they're rich or poor. And that really is exactly what James was saying on the last slide. He was linking it to justice, and we see that here this verse ties justice and fairness together, and along with partiality. So, but this is not the justice of the world. The police caught the murderer, and therefore the family got justice. You often hear phrases like that on the cop shows, and so sometimes at the end of the show, when they figured out who the criminal was, and now he's in jail and he's going to be going to court, they go to the family and they'll say something like, well, at least you got justice. You lost your spouse or your children or whatever it was, but at least you got justice. That's not the justice that is being talked about here. The justice that's being talked about here is fairness, equal treatment of people. And we often misuse the word justice in our society that way. God's justice is really just treating everyone fairly, treating everyone equally. So giving to the church, giving to others, and favoritism. And we'll ask some important questions here. Is it favoritism to give to some people who are in need and not to others? Is it okay for you to give to one person? Aren't you favoring one person by giving one poor person some money and not another poor person? That's kind of an interesting question. Or is it favoritism to give to the needy and not to those who have lots of money? Because that seems like you're treating people unequally too, based on their wealth. So think about that one. And so another question is God playing favorites by only giving the Holy Spirit to believers? Because we know that that's true. God only gives the Holy Spirit to believers in Jesus. So is God being unfair by doing these things? And so the important thing to understand is all of this is about what's in you, okay? And do you think that some people are more important than others? That's really the question. Are you treating them one person favored over another person? And so in the case of giving to people in need, it's not a problem there because you can only give to a certain number of people. It's not possible to give to everyone. And so you're the person who gives to this person, somebody else gives to another person, and in the bigger picture, it's not favoritism. And so um, you can be seen as doing wrong, or somebody might think you're doing wrong, but you aren't, because the favoritism isn't in you. You aren't giving to this poor person because you're favoring that person over another. You're giving to that person because that is a person in need who needs the help. And so we see that applies to both of our questions at the start. And so you're being merciful towards someone, and mercy is something that we're going to see coming up again here, being tied along with the golden rule. And so when you're giving to people, that's not favoritism because you aren't favoring someone. You're actually just helping someone. Hope that's clear. So what's the golden rule about? It's about a lot of different things that we've talked about here, and I'll summarize this quickly. So it's about the interpersonal commandments. We saw that in the what Jesus said about giving to, about the second most important commandment of the commandments, and those interpersonal commandments are the ones that we know from the Ten Commandments: honor your father and your mother. You shall not murder, including spiritual murder. We know that that's not just physical murder. You shall not commit adultery, including spiritual adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. So lying, hypocrisy, those sort of things. And you shall not covet. So the golden rule is about all of these things because it comes from that same second most important commandment, as Jesus said. All of those, that commandment is the head of all of these interpersonal commandments. They all come from it in a sense. So it's all about all of those things. It's about fairness in all of these things. And it's about love, obviously. It said, love your neighbor as yourself. And so that's plain enough there that it's about love. But it's also about humility. It's about accepting the idea that you are like me and I'm not greater than you. That would justify that you should be treated differently than me. And no other person is greater than you. We are all alike in what we expect from life. We want fairness. We want to be treated equally, all of that stuff. And so once you recognize that other people are just like you, that's a step of humility. You see that you aren't better than other people, and there's nothing that would justify treating other people differently or more poorly than you. Yeah, the golden rule is also about taking the initiative. It's about that idea of you act first and make the world a better place. And so by being the person who reaches out first to help someone, even though they might not be deserving of help or you have no reason they didn't help you in the past, you are the person who acts first and you're the person who makes the world a better place. And you aren't waiting for somebody so that you won't do something bad. You're actually doing something good to start out. So taking the initiative is partly what the golden rule is about. That was the change that Jesus really brought about. He took the positive form and said, do these things first, and not just don't do the bad things, but do the good things first. And as we talked about a lot, justice. The golden rule is definitely about justice, and not the justice of the world that we talked about, not that sense of getting even or getting fair or making things equal, but it's about treating people always fairly and equally and having the same standard for everyone. Now, you might have noticed that that's an awful lot like hypocrisy. Hypocrisy is having a different standard for people. And so lying, as we mentioned before, being one of those commandments that is covered by this, is also part of this. And it's about mercy and grace. Golden rule is about showing mercy to people, showing grace to people who you don't have any reason to do it. You're doing it just because they have a need. And so you're doing what's good to them. And so the golden rule is about all of these things. And it's much more than a lot of people realize. I know I kind of roared through that a little bit, but we'll summarize it quickly here. The golden rule is built on a very ancient idea, and that very ancient idea we saw from the Old Testament, but even before that, the basis for that is the basis for how people are. People want to be treated fairly, and you do, all of your neighbors do, everybody wants to be treated fairly. And so you are like everyone else in that way, and when you recognize that you are like everyone else in that way, along comes humility and other things. And also, as Jesus said, that recognition that everybody needs help sometime. And so whenever there's an opportunity for you to treat someone, to help someone, you can do that. And you would do that because you want them to do the same thing to you.
I think that just all of the presentations that we've given today just all fit together quite well. And, it's just a good reminder for all of us to keep and to, have even more discussions on them a little bit later, just to expand on it a little bit more in detail. But we just always forget about using that golden rule.
Yeah, I think we do as adults.
Yeah, exactly. But anyway, yeah, great presentation. Thank you, Sam.